In the northeastern border regions of the Sumy Oblast lies the small village of Andrivka. To many, that village would appear inconsequential. It's a small settlement that offers Russian President Vladimir Putin little in terms of territorial gains. However, it's been a target for Putin ever since he launched his summer Sumy offensive. Earlier in June, Putin's forces managed to occupy the village. On June 14th, Ukraine retook it in a well-coordinated counteroffensive. Ukraine just scored a significant victory with the total liberation of Andrivka. Putin is furious. His operations in Sumy and Donetsk are on hold, as he now must respond to Ukraine's renewed pushback. Before we explain how, let's recap recent events. On June 4th, both Pravda.ua and the Deep State Telegram channel confirmed that Russia had seized Andrivka and Vodolahi, while also attempting to advance toward Dilyivka and Yablonivka. By June 4th, Russia controlled Andrivka and several nearby border villages, a move aimed at establishing a buffer line inside Sumy Oblast. However, Ukrainian forces regrouped and launched a decisive counterattack. Within about 10 days, spearheaded by the 225th Separate Assault Regiment, they recaptured Andrivka on June 14th, halting the Russian advance and reclaiming strategic control around the border area. This rapid counterattack demonstrated Ukraine's ability to match Russian tactics on its own ground, effectively reversing Russia's buffer zone strategy in northern Sumy. Reuters offers the details we know so far in a June 14th report. It says that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the liberation of Andrivka as part of a large effort by Ukraine to drive Russia's forces out of the Sumy region. Zelensky told us everything we needed to know in his daily statement published on the President of Ukraine's website. There was a report from the Commander-in-Chief, Oleksandr Syrskyi, on the front line in our active operations. Particular and very serious attention was given to the Pokrovsk direction and to our Sumy region, especially its border areas. We are managing to push Russian forces out of those areas. We'll come back to Pokrovsk in a moment. But now, Zelensky's statement continues, based on the outcomes of these days, our deepest gratitude is due to the warriors of the 225th Separate Assault Regiment, specifically for their offensive actions in the border areas in the Sumy region and, in particular, for the liberation of Andrivka. That's right from the horse's mouth. Andrivka is Ukraine's again. And it's all thanks to the 225th Separate Assault Regiment, a battalion of Ukraine's armed forces that was formed on March 8, 2022, mere weeks after Putin invaded Ukraine. The 225th Separate Assault Regiment was originally stationed in the Kharkiv Oblast. It carries military number A7400 and is an assault infantry regiment that originally operated under Ukraine's 127th Territorial Defense Brigade. It was also a battalion when it first formed and continued to be so in July 2023 when its command was shifted to Ukraine's ground forces. It was only in February 2025 that the 225th Separate Assault Regiment was expanded into a regiment. Around 4 months later, the regiment made that expansion pay by pushing out Putin's forces from Andrivka. The regiment already has a colorful story. It played a key role in the Kharkiv counteroffensive early in the war, before spending several months fighting in Bakhmut. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to prevent Putin's forces from taking that vital city, with a similar result when it took part in the defense of Avdiivka. However, these early failures weren't a mark against the battalion, which was expanded into a regiment soon after. In May 2024, it was one of the first Ukrainian groups to capture one of Russia's ultra-modern T-90 tanks. A few months later, it also played a key role in Ukraine's counter-invasion of the Kursk Oblast. Subunits of the regiment managed to destroy several of Russia's border defenses, creating gaps in the defenses for other Ukrainian units to exploit. It also continues its activities in Kursk, capturing Russian soldiers and territory in the process. It was around this time that even Russia began to fear the 225th Separate Assault Regiment. Russian state television started calling the regiment one of the most elite that Ukraine had, noting that it was also equipped with the best Western tech. When Russia managed to push Ukraine's forces out of Kursk earlier this year, the 225th Separate Assault Regiment would have ended up in Sumy. Perhaps that explains why they were in Andrivka, unable to use the regiment's considerable talents to continue taking territory in Kursk. Zelensky and his military advisors instead refocused the group's efforts on retaking a village that Putin had spent weeks trying to capture. The result of all these efforts? Zelensky says that the recapture of Andrivka has stopped the Russian advance through Sumy in its tracks. "We are leveling the position," Reuters reports Ukraine's president is saying. "The fighting there is along the border. You should understand that the enemy has been stopped there, and the maximum depth at which the fighting takes place is 7 kilometers from the border." Reuters says that it hasn't been able to independently verify Zelensky's report, though it notes that Russia has intensified its attacks in Sumy over the last few months. Putin supposedly intends to create a buffer zone between Sumy and Kharkiv, with these attacks, though it seems much more likely that he sees Sumy as a potential route into the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. This is huge for Ukraine. With Andrika reclaimed, it has just undone weeks of Russian work. And that's not all. Earlier we mentioned that Ukraine has also experienced considerable success in Pokrovsk, an extremely significant city. Pokrovsk is just 12.4 miles away from Donetsk's administrative border, according to Euronews. That's one of the reasons Putin wants it. He spent the last few months constantly attacking the city, which had a pre-war population of 60,000, because taking it brings him one step closer to the administrative border. Take that border, and you take Donetsk. As with allowing Russia to advance in Sumy, Ukraine can't allow that to happen. Ukraine also can't afford to lose Pokrovsk because it's a key Ukrainian stronghold and logistical hub. The city is home to several key roads that allow Ukraine to keep its soldiers in Donetsk supplied to battle against Putin's pushes in the region. Plus, we can't ignore the fact that Pokrovsk is just a 2.5-hour drive away from Dnipro. Losing Pokrovsk opens the door for Putin to push his forces deeper into central Ukraine and, as with Sumy, closer to Kyiv. Zelensky says that Ukraine has managed to push back Russia's forces near the city. "I will also commend today the 425th Separate Assault Regiment," he said in his daily address, "for their successful actions in our Pokrovsk direction. Also, the 1st Separate Assault Regiment and the 82nd Separate Air Assault Brigade proved themselves in combat in the Donetsk region. Thank you very much." The Kyiv Post followed up on these comments, noting that Zelensky also said, "Special attention is focused on the Pokrovsk direction and our Sumy region, especially the border areas. We are managing to push Russian forces out. I thank all our units for these tangible results." Putin just got hit with a 1-2 punch. His forces have just been pushed out of Andrivka and repelled from Pokrovsk. There are two reasons why all of this matters, starting with the most obvious one: Putin really wants Sumy. He's wanted it ever since the beginning of the war, as it was one of the first Ukrainian regions that Russia's forces occupied when Putin launched his supposed special military operation. The Battle of Sumy actually started on the first day of the invasion, seeing Ukrainian paratroopers and territorial defense forces engaging the Russian invaders from the off. Initially, those Ukrainian fighters experienced some success. They decimated a Russian tank column before they received the order to withdraw from Sumy city. Putin might have thought he was about to win. He was wrong. Though the paratroopers left, Sumy was still being defended by several thousand volunteers armed with rifles and some anti-tank weapons. For around 4 days, they held the line so well against Russia's forces that Putin decided to bypass Sumy altogether so he could focus on attacking Kyiv. That was a mistake, as Russia's forces pulled out of the city and attempted to circle around it. They were ambushed over and over in guerrilla-style attacks that left them unable to proceed. By April 8th, Ukraine had succeeded in pushing Putin's forces out of Sumy. They've held the oblast ever since. What happened in Sumy was one of the first major victories Ukraine experienced following Putin's invasion. It was also proof that Ukraine could push back against Putin's forces. While it would be inaccurate to claim that Sumy alone was the reason why Ukraine went on to receive so much support from the West, it's victories like this that seem to convince Europe and the US that Ukraine stood a fighting chance against Russia's invading forces. Putin switched his focus away from Sumy following his 2022 failure, instead preferring to dedicate his soldiers to Donetsk and the wider Donbas region. That may also have been a mistake. After all, it was a lack of Russian presence in border regions like Sumy that enabled Ukraine to launch the 2024 Kursk counter-invasion. The bloody battles over the territory that Ukraine captured are believed to have cost Putin 62,400 soldiers, per the Kyiv Independent, before Russia was able to push Ukraine's forces out. All of that brings us to the present day and Putin's renewed Sumy offensive. Likely wanting to avoid a situation like the one he saw in August 2024 in the Kursk invasion, Putin has decided to push on after expelling Ukraine's forces from his territory. Sumy is now a target because, as previously mentioned, Putin sees the capture of territory in that oblast as a way to build a buffer zone. Several, in fact. He wants a buffer zone that separates Sumy from Russia's border oblasts, such as Kursk. He also wants a buffer zone between Sumy and Kharkiv, perhaps allowing him to isolate the latter for a future concerted offensive. And Putin is serious about taking Sumy. As Euronews reported on May 28th, Zelensky says that Russia has amassed around 50,000 troops near Sumy. Now they are accumulating troops in the direction of Sumy, over 50,000, Zelensky said. We understand, but have had success there. Zelensky also noted at the time that Putin seemed to be dedicating some of his best troops to the nearby Kursk region. That announcement of Russia's amassed forces also came with another, revealing that Russia had managed to capture 4 villages in Sumy. Ukraine also evacuated approximately 56,000 civilians from the oblast as Russia's intensified attacks became daily. Russia has been trying to push on in Sumy ever since. The New York Times says that the advance represents a shift in Russia's war rhythm to the point where it was able to capture 173 square miles of Ukraine in May. That was double what Russia captured in April, though still not a particularly impressive figure. Most of those gains came from the south of Konstantinivka, which is in Donetsk, and the northern Sumy region where Andrivka is located. Russia has also started using civilian cars and motorcycles to cross undefended Ukraine quickly, which has accounted for some of its faster gains. By June 14th, Russia had managed to capture at least 12 villages in Sumy, the New York Times says. It characterizes Russia's advance as tiny but frequent, with Putin seemingly adopting the Ukrainian strategy of using small assault groups, often containing as few as 2 or 3 soldiers, to probe Ukraine's defenses. The approach has been working, and it's a smart move by Putin. The Sumy terrain is full of ravines and similar obstacles, which makes attacking by road practically the only option. The larger the force, the more likely it is to be caught up in the types of ambushes that Ukraine used to drive Russia out during the Battle of Sumy in 2022. With smaller forces, Putin can take scraps of territory without losing huge numbers of soldiers. Ukraine is downplaying these Sumy successes. The Washington Post says that Zelensky has claimed that Russia's renewed offensive is not that successful, to put it mildly. It's reporting on comments Zelensky made to the German outlet Bild, in which Zelensky also said that Putin feels that his economy is suffering now, but he wants to buy more time before tough sanctions are imposed because he can hold out for a while. Remember that point? We'll come back to it later. The point here is that Putin has been shifting forces to Sumy, and though he's not making massive territorial gains, which is likely why Zelensky says the offensive isn't successful, he is capturing small villages and other settlements. That brings us back to what Ukraine achieved with Andrivka. By retaking the settlement, Ukraine has just shown Putin that it's as capable of launching the types of offensives on which Putin is relying as well. What we're likely to see is a stalemate start to form. Russia may take a village or 2 here, Ukraine will retake a settlement or 2 there. If things go Ukraine's way, Russia's summer offensive in Sumy will capture precious little territory. It'll also achieve something else, limiting Putin's offensives elsewhere. Earlier we mentioned that Putin had amassed a force of 50,000 soldiers to attack Sumy. Those soldiers certainly didn't come from the forces Putin used to retake Kursk, as much as he would have liked them to. Remember, Russia lost over 60,000 troops to that effort. That means that Putin lost the 50,000-strong force he'd amassed to retake Kursk, along with thousands of reinforcements. He was spent in the region after pushing Ukraine out. So where did the 50,000 soldiers come from? Donetsk. At least there and other East Ukrainian regions on which Putin focused through much of 2024. The New Voice of Ukraine confirmed this on May 27th, commenting on a report made by the Institute for the Study of War that Russia had redeployed its 200th Motorized Rifle Brigade and its 752nd Motorized Rifle Regiment to Sumy. Putin had to. He didn't have any troops left for his Sumy offensive. What we see here is a situation where Putin is weakening Russia's forces elsewhere to make gains in the Sumy Oblast. That is creating opportunities for Ukraine. The gains near Pokrovsk that Ukraine made on the same day as retaking Andrivka may not have happened were it not for Putin diverting so many of his forces from Donetsk. The more successes like this that Ukraine achieves, the more soldiers Putin has to redeploy, and the less pressure is placed on Ukraine's troops elsewhere. Ideally for Zelensky, this will allow Ukraine to hold the front line even as Putin attempts to expand it. Reuters says that Zelensky has said as much himself, noting that Ukraine is holding that 621-mile front line even as Russia claims to have made advances into Dnipropetrovsk. Ukraine's president says that Putin has been limited to sending small assault groups to get one foot on the administrative border we mentioned earlier. There, those groups might get a picture or a video, but are soon repelled. It's all a propaganda play. Tangible results, such as Ukraine retaking Andrivka, hold up far better under scrutiny, Zelensky seems to be implying. All that's left to ponder is what comes after Ukraine's victory in Andrivka. Zelensky offers some hints, essentially noting that while this was an important victory, it's not a game-changer in the Ukraine war. Ukraine and its allies need to do much more if they're going to repel Putin's marauding forces deeper into 2025. In his daily address, Zelensky says, "Today I had a separate discussion with the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, and the Chief of the General Staff regarding the protection of our skies. Russian attack drones still pose a daily threat, and we need much more effective responses, technological responses. We need to make much better use of the time for developing the air defense system. So the protection of Ukraine's skies is a clear priority, as it always has been." However, Zelensky also seems to suggest that the perfect follow-up to victories like the one in Andrivka is even tougher sanctions placed on Russia by Ukraine's allies. His point is simple. Putin can maintain his offensives because he still has money coming in. That's what Zelensky's comments about Putin buying more time made to Bild really meant. Ukraine's president believes that tougher sanctions will minimize Russia's resources. This, in turn, reduces the amount of pressure Putin can place on Ukraine, which will also push Russia back to the negotiating table for a potential peace deal. A ceiling of $45 per barrel of oil is better than $60. That's clear. That's true, Zelensky said during the Ukraine Southeast Europe summit on June 11th. But real peace will come with a ceiling of $30. That's the level that will really change the mindset in Moscow. Translation: for Ukrainian victories like the one in Andrivka to really matter, Europe needs to ramp up the economic pressure on Putin. Whether we'll see that type of follow-up remains to be seen, but for now, Ukraine has succeeded in slowing down Putin's summer Sumy offensive. And if it can retake more villages that Russia's forces believe they held, that offensive may break down into a tit-for-tat battle that ultimately gets Putin nowhere. And while all of this is going on, Putin faces major problems on his own territory. Ukraine's daring Operation Spiderweb has forced Russia's leader to scramble so he can hide his air fleet. Find out what this means and how it might impact the Ukraine war in our video. And remember to subscribe to the Military Show if you want more up-to-date coverage on the latest events in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.